Welcome, everyone. You are about to hear 3 Christmas stories from the same small town. Each one begins with something small, something easy to ignore, something that feels normal at first. But I'll give you just one spoiler. By the end, you'll realize they were never separate stories. Before we start, tell me something. Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? You can leave that in the comments. So now, get comfortable, and let's begin.
The street that went quiet.
Riverton, Indiana looks exactly like the kind of town people forget exists. It doesn't have landmarks. It doesn't have stories that make the news. It has streets that loop back into themselves, houses that look almost identical, and trees that feel a little too close to the road. During December, Riverton tries harder than usual to feel welcoming. Christmas lights go up early, not because people are excited, it's because it's what they've always done. Every house on Alder Street is decorated by the first week of the month, some with care, some out of habit. Strings of lights along rooftops, plastic figures on lawns, glowing windows that make the nights feel less empty. The forest that surrounds the town stays dark no matter how many lights people put up. Lila Harper had grown up noticing things like that. She was 14, tall for her age, with long curly red hair that never stayed where she put it. Teachers called her observant. Her mother called her sensitive. Lila didn't think of it as either. She just paid attention when patterns repeated themselves. That night, she was riding her bike slowly, hands loose on the handlebars, watching the lights flicker faintly in her peripheral vision as she moved. Evan Miller rode ahead of her, confident, relaxed, already thinking about getting home before it got too cold. He was 15 and liked explanations. If something happened, there was usually a reason for it, and if there wasn't, he didn't like dwelling on it. Behind them was Noah Miller, Evan's younger brother. Noah was 13 and quieter. He rode with his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he were always listening for something that hadn't arrived yet. Caleb Wright zigzagged across the street, kicking at patches of old snow with his tires, laughing whenever someone suggested slowing down. They had all ridden down Alder Street hundreds of times. That was why it stood out when it changed. They didn't notice it all at once. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It began with the lights. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the Christmas lights along the street flickered, not randomly, but together. Porch lights, lawn decorations, window frames. Every strand dimmed at the same time, as if someone had lowered the volume on the entire street. Lila slowed instinctively. The air shifted next, cold, sharp, sudden. Not the kind that creeped in, the kind that arrived all at once, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in a single breath. Noah squeezed his brakes. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "What?" Evan replied, already looking up at the power lines. Noah shook his head, struggling to explain. "It's not a sound. It's like everything sounds farther away." Caleb laughed. "You mean quiet?" But it wasn't quiet. Lila noticed something else. The sound of their bikes, the chains, the tires on pavement, felt muted. Their voices didn't echo the way they normally did between the houses. It was as if the street had absorbed the noise instead of reflecting it. The lights flickered again. Then they went still. Not off, just steady, too steady. Lila's eyes moved down the street without her thinking about it, stopping on one house in particular. It was older than the others, set slightly back, decorated but barely. White lights, no color, no movement. The kind of house people stopped updating years ago without realizing it. For a moment, just one, Lila had the strange feeling that the house wasn't dark, that something inside it was paying attention. The lights returned to normal. Sound came back. Cold faded. Evan exhaled. "Transformer," he said. "Has to be. Everyone's running lights." Caleb nodded immediately. "Told you." Noah didn't move. Lila didn't argue. She looked at her watch. 9:17. The number stayed with her long after they started riding again.
They didn't talk much after that. The bikes rolled forward again, tires crunching softly over thin patches of snow, but the rhythm was off. The street felt wider than it had a minute ago, like the houses had shifted slightly farther apart. Lila kept glancing at the windows as they passed, not because she expected to see something, because she couldn't stop wondering if something had already seen them. When they reached the end of Alder Street, the normal sounds of Riverton slowly returned. A television through an open window, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, the distant hum of traffic from the highway. It felt like crossing an invisible line. Caleb was the first to speak. "See? Power glitch. That house probably pulls too much electricity." Evan nodded immediately. "Old wiring. Makes sense." Noah hesitated before pedaling again. It didn't feel like power. "What does power feel like?" Caleb asked, smirking. Noah didn't answer. Lila stayed quiet. That night she dreamed about the street. Not the houses, not the lights, just the way the air had felt. Heavy, pressed down like something had briefly occupied the space where sound should have been. The next morning, Alder Street looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Sunlight reflected off the snow, making the decorations look cheerful again. Extension cords ran across lawns, plastic figures leaned slightly to one side from the wind. No scorch marks, no broken lights, no signs that anything unusual had happened. They walked the street slowly, pretending to look for dropped gloves or bike tracks. Evan checked the power boxes near the sidewalk. Everything looked intact. Caleb kicked at the curb, disappointed. Noah stopped near the house Lila stared at the night before. Up close, it felt different. Not threatening, just older. The decorations were minimal. White lights, evenly spaced, no blinking patterns, no music, no inflatable figures. The windows were clean, but the curtains were always drawn. "Someone lives here," Evan said. "Look, footprints." They knocked. No answer. Lila noticed something then, a faint humming, barely audible, not coming from the house, from beneath the street. She bent slightly, pretending to tie her shoe, pressing her palm against the cold asphalt. The vibration stopped. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Caleb rolled his eyes. "You're trying to make it spooky." Evan straightened. "There's nothing here, Lila." They stood there another minute before leaving. Nothing happened the rest of the day. Nothing happened the next night. Christmas passed, snow melted, school resumed. Alder Street faded back into memory. And yet, every time Lila checked the clock at night, she noticed the same thing. 9:17. It started showing up everywhere. Microwaves, car dashboards, school hallway clocks. She didn't tell anyone. A year went by. By the time December came back around, it almost felt silly to think about that night. Almost. But when the lights went up again on Alder Street, Lila felt the same tension settle in her chest, like waiting for a song to reach the part you remember, even if you pretend you don't. They didn't talk about it. They didn't have to. On December 24th, they were back on their bikes without making plans. Evan said it was nostalgia. Caleb said it was boredom. Noah didn't say anything at all. Snow fell lightly, soft enough to muffle their tires. As they turned onto Alder Street, Lila checked her watch.
9:14. They slowed instinctively. At 9:16, the hum started. This time, Lila heard it too. Low, vibrating, not loud enough to locate. The lights flickered once. Then, everything went dark. Not just the decorations, the street lights, the windows, the glow from inside houses. Darkness dropped over Alder Street as if someone had covered it with a lid. Noah gasped. Something moved under the street. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. One of the bikes tipped over on its own, the metal clattering too loudly in the silence. From a nearby lawn, a plastic Santa snapped to life, music playing through a speaker that hadn't been connected to power. Lila felt the ground shift beneath her foot, just slightly. Then a door opened down the street. Light spilled out. The darkness retreated all at once. The hum stopped. A voice called out, asking what they were doing there so late. The street looked normal again. Too normal. They stood frozen for a second longer than necessary before turning their bikes around. No one said it, but all of them felt it. Whatever had happened the year before hadn't finished. It had been waiting.
They stayed. That was the mistake. The street looked calm again, lights steady, houses quiet. But none of them believed it this time, not after what they had felt, not after how close it had been. Snow drifted slowly through the air, catching the glow of the decorations. Somewhere, a clock inside a house chimed softly, marking the hour. Evan checked his phone again. Still no signal. "We shouldn't be here," Caleb said, quieter now. "If someone sees us—" "They already did," Noah replied, staring down the street. "The door." The house with the white lights hadn't turned anything off during the blackout. It hadn't flickered. It hadn't reacted at all. That felt wrong. Leela was already moving toward it. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. The others followed, bikes left behind near a tree, tires sinking slightly into the snow. Up close, the house felt different than it had from the street. Not abandoned, not hostile, occupied. The front yard was clean, no footprints except one set leading to the door and back again. The white lights hummed faintly, steady, almost clinical. Leela noticed something else. The air felt heavier near the porch, like standing at the edge of deep water. Evan reached the door first. "We knock," he said, more to convince himself than anyone else. He knocked once. Nothing. Caleb tried the handle before anyone could stop him. It opened. The door creaked softly, slow enough to sound intentional. They froze, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint hum they had felt outside, stronger now, closer. Inside, the house smelled old. Dust, wood, something metallic underneath. The lights were on, but dim, casting long shadows that didn't quite match the furniture. They stepped in one by one. The door closed behind them with a dull, final sound. Noah swallowed hard. "We should leave." "Just look," Leela whispered, "then we go." The living room was neat, too neat, decorations placed carefully, not joyfully. A small artificial tree stood in the corner, undecorated except for a single strand of white lights. No presents, no cards, no signs of celebration. They moved slowly, afraid of making noise even though no one seemed to be there. The hum grew stronger near the back of the house, vibrating faintly through the floorboards. Leela felt it in her legs.
The hallway narrowed toward a door that stood slightly ajar. From beneath it, light spilled out, brighter than the rest of the house. "That's where it's coming from," Noah said. Evan hesitated. "This is breaking in." Caleb shook his head. The door was open. That wasn't reassurance. They reached the door together. Inside was a small room, bare walls, a table pushed against one side, and on the floor. They stopped. The symbol. Not just one, several. Drawn faintly in chalk, scratched into wood, pressed into the surface of the floor like someone had tried to copy the same shape over and over again, never quite getting it right. Incomplete, uneven, obsessive. The hum intensified, low and constant now. Leela stepped closer, heart pounding. The symbols weren't random. They curved in the same direction. All of them pointed inward toward a single spot near the center of the room. Something about it felt strained, like pressure held too long. "Guys," whispered Evan, "I don't think—" A floorboard creaked behind them. They spun around. A figure stood in the doorway. An older man, thin, pale. His eyes fixed on them with something between shock and exhaustion. For a moment, no one spoke. Then his voice cut through the room. "What are you doing in my house?" For a moment, no one answered him. The old man stood perfectly still in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame as if he had been there for a while. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't surprised either. It looked tired. Evan spoke first. "The door was open. We heard something." The man's eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the chalk marks on the floor, the half-erased symbols, the spot where the boards looked more worn than the rest. Then his gaze returned to them. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You shouldn't ever be here at night." Noah swallowed. "What is this place?" The man didn't answer. He stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. The hum softened, dropping to something barely perceptible, like a breath being held again. Lila noticed his hands shaking, not with fear, with effort. "Those symbols," Caleb said, unable to stop himself, "they're outside, too." That got a reaction. The man turned sharply. "You saw them?" Lila nodded. "On the street, near the middle." For a second, the man looked past them, not at the walls, not at the symbols, but at something that wasn't there anymore. "They're not supposed to be disturbed," he said quietly. Evan glanced at the floor. "They look unfinished." The man's jaw tightened. "They always are." He crossed the room and knelt with difficulty near the center point where the symbols converged. From a drawer beneath the table, he pulled out a notebook. Its pages were thick, warped from age, filled with dates. December 24, December 25, over and over again. Times written beside them. 9/17. Every year. Noah leaned closer. Why that time? The man looked up at him, eyes sharp now. "Because that's when it presses back." The hum deepened slightly, as if reacting to being acknowledged. Lila felt it again, the same pressure she'd felt in the street. The room seemed smaller than it had a moment ago. "What happens if you stop?" she asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked toward the far wall, pulling aside a thin cabinet to reveal a door they hadn't noticed before. It led downward. The air coming from it was colder. "I don't stop," he said. "I manage." Evan took an involuntary step back. "What manage?" The man's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. 9:11. "Time," he said. From below, the hum intensified. Lila felt it drawn toward the stairs without knowing why. She could sense something beneath them, not a shape, not a sound, but a presence pressing upward, testing the space. The cymbals on the floor vibrated faintly. Caleb whispered, "We should go." The man straightened suddenly. "No." His voice was firmer now, sharper. "You shouldn't know this much, and you shouldn't be here when it happens." "What happens?" Noah asked. The clock ticked. 9:13. The man moved faster than Lila expected, stepping between them and the stairs. He pulled the notebook back under the table, erasing a chalk mark with his sleeve in a practiced motion. "You think you're the first to be curious? You think curiosity doesn't leave marks?" The hum pulsed. Lila's chest tightened. She felt the same weightless sensation again, just for a second, like missing a step. "Something's wrong," she said. "You're not stopping it. You're just—" The man grabbed her wrist, not hard, desperate. "Enough," he said. "I won't let you make it worse." Evan stepped forward. "Let go of her." The man released her immediately, backing away as if he had crossed a line. His breathing was uneven now. "This ends tonight. It always does, and it will end cleanly." He moved past them, out of the room, his footsteps heavy in the hallway. They heard a phone being lifted, dialing. Caleb's voice shook. Who was he calling? Lila already knew. As the hum beneath Riverton swelled once more, pressing against the floorboards, the man's voice carried back down the hall. "I need an officer. There are kids in my house." The clock ticked again. 9:15. And whatever was waiting beneath Riverton felt closer than it had all night.
The police car arrived without sirens. Its headlights washed over Alder Street slowly, deliberately, cutting through the glow of Christmas decorations as if the street itself were being examined. Snow crunched beneath the tires as it stopped in front of the house. The hum beneath the ground faded almost immediately. Not gone, muted. The old man stood on his porch when the officer stepped out of the car, arms crossed tightly against his chest. He looked relieved in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. The kids were lined up near the curb, bikes scattered where they had left them, breath fogging the cold air. The officer spoke calmly, professionally, asked names, asked ages, asked why they were inside a house that wasn't theirs. Evan answered most of the questions. Caleb nodded along. Noah stayed quiet, staring at the street as if it expected it to move again. Lila watched the officer's face. He listened, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the house, toward the ground beneath it, toward the way the porch light flickered faintly, even though nothing else on the street did. "You didn't see anything unusual?" he asked. Evan hesitated. "The lights went out." "That happens," the officer said easily. "The sound changed," Noah added softly. The officer paused, just for a moment. "Changed how?" Noah opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know how to answer. The officer nodded once, as if filing something away. Inside the house, he walked slowly from room to room.
The decorations, the furniture, the unfinished chalk marks on the floor, partially erased now, smudged by hurried hands. He crouched near the center of the room, fingers brushing the wood where the symbols had been. Nothing happened. Still, he stayed there longer than necessary. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. Not sunrise, just the promise of it. The kind of gray that made everything feel flat and unreal. Phones rang one by one. Parents arrived in cars and trucks, coats thrown on hastily, voices low and tense. Explanations were exchanged quickly, carefully, like everyone wanted this night to shrink back into something manageable. Lila's mother arrived last. She pulled Lila into a tight hug without asking questions right away. Her eyes moved from the house to the street to the officer, lingering on each just a little too long. "Let's go," she said quietly. As the kids were ushered away, the officer stood near his car, watching the street again. He checked his watch. 9:18. The time bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The hum didn't return. The lights stayed on. Everything appeared settled. As Lila walked toward her mother's car, something caught her eye. The pavement. Near the center of the street, where the vibration had felt strongest earlier, the snow had thinned, melted unevenly, revealing a faint shape beneath. The symbol. Incomplete, worn, waiting. No one else noticed it. Lila stopped. Her mother called her name once, impatient. Lila didn't answer. She stepped off the curb and onto the street. The cold pressed up through the sole of her boot as she placed her foot directly over the center of the symbol. This time, she felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, a shift, like something adjusting its weight. The pressure beneath the ground changed, not stronger, not weaker, just different, focused, contained. Lila pulled her foot back quickly, heart racing. Nothing happened. No reaction, no response. Her mother took her arm and guided her toward the car, unaware of what had just occurred. Across the street, the officer felt it. He couldn't explain what had drawn his attention back to the pavement. He just knew something had changed after the kids left. He stared at the street, at the houses, at the quiet glow of Christmas lights that now felt staged, artificial. The feeling settled low in his stomach. As the cars pulled away and Alder Street emptied, he stood there alone for a moment longer than he needed to. Something wasn't finished. Something had shifted, and whatever it was, it had noticed the girl before anyone else did.
The officer who noticed time.
Christmas Eve shifts the rhythm of a police station. Calls slow down, voices lower. Even the radio seemed to crackle less aggressively, as if the town itself is trying not to draw attention to anything unpleasant before morning. Officer Daniel Miller was halfway through his shift when he checked the clock above the bulletin board. 9:11 p.m. Riverton felt settled. Too settled. Most families were already home, lights glowing behind drawn curtains, streets quiet except for the occasional car returning late from a relative's house. Daniel sat at his desk, finishing paperwork that didn't really need finishing. It was easier than admitting he was restless. He had worked Christmas Eve before. Nothing about this one felt remarkable. Until the call came in. Not urgent, not panicked. Measured. Unit 3, dispatch said. Possible trespassing, Alder Street. Daniel straightened slightly. Details? Homeowner reports several juveniles entered the residence without permission. No injuries reported. Daniel glanced at the clock again. 9:14. I'm on my way. He grabbed his coat and keys, nodding to no one in particular as he stepped out into the cold. Snow drifted lightly through the station's parking lot, soft enough to muffle his footsteps. The drive to Alder Street took less than 5 minutes. As he turned onto the road, Daniel noticed something immediately. The quiet. Not the normal kind. Not the peaceful end-of-night calm Riverton usually carried on holidays. This quiet felt contained. The patrol car rolled forward slowly, headlights sweeping over houses dressed in Christmas lights. Everything was on. Everything was steady. No flickering, no signs of a disturbance. And yet, Daniel felt it. A subtle pressure in his chest, like walking into a room where a conversation had just stopped. He pulled up in front of the house with the white lights. The homeowner stood on the porch, arms folded tight, posture rigid. Relief crossed his face the moment he saw the patrol car. Not relief that the police were there, relief that the moment had passed. Daniel stepped out of the car. As soon as the engine shut off, the feeling shifted. The air loosened slightly. The street seemed to exhale. Daniel didn't know how he knew, only that whatever had been close a minute ago had pulled back. "You the one who called?" The man nodded quickly. "They were inside. I told them to leave." Daniel glanced past him toward the open door. "Anyone hurt?" "No," the man said. "Nothing like that. Just kids." Daniel looked down the street. 4 bicycles stood near the curb, their riders gathered nearby. Teenagers, nervous, cold, watching him closely. He recognized 2 of them immediately, Evan and Noah. His stomach tightened. "Evan," he said, "what are you doing here?" Evan opened his mouth, then closed it again. They went inside," the old man cut in, "without asking." Daniel raised his hand slightly, signaling for calm. "I'll talk to them." As Daniel walked towards the kids, Daniel noticed something else. The time. He checked his watch. 9:17. The number bothered him, though he couldn't say why. He separated the group gently, asked questions, listened. Their answers overlapped, contradicted, circled around something none of them quite named. Lights going out, a sound changing, something under the street. Daniel didn't react outwardly. He'd heard worse explanations for less. He followed the old man inside. The house was quiet, orderly, too controlled. Decorations minimal, no signs of a struggle. But the floor, Daniel stopped short. Marks, faint, uneven, recently disturbed. Symbols, not active, not glowing, not doing anything at all, but something about them felt unfinished. He crouched, pressing his fingers lightly to the wood. The sensation wasn't physical, more like standing near machinery that had just powered down. "Everything's fine now," the old man said quickly. "It always settles." Daniel stood. "Settles," he repeated. The man didn't answer. Outside, parents were beginning to arrive, called one by one. Explanations were simplified. The incident was reduced to what it could safely be: trespassing, curiosity, a misunderstanding. Daniel avoided filing any more than necessary. By the time the kids were escorted away, the street felt ordinary again. Too ordinary. Daniel stepped back onto the porch and checked his watch one last time. 9:18. He felt a sharp, unwelcome thought surface. Whatever had happened here, he had arrived just after it ended, and that timing mattered.
Daniel didn't write the report right away. He waited until the station was quiet again, until Christmas Eve had fully passed and Riverton had settled into the strange stillness that comes after midnight on a holiday. The kind of calm that feels earned, almost enforced. He kept the report short. Trespassing. No damage. No injuries. Nothing unusual. That was the official version. The unofficial one stayed in his head. He couldn't stop thinking about the timing. Not the kids. Not the old man. The moment between arriving and feeling the street change. The way the air had seemed to loosen as soon as his car pulled up. Containment. That was the word that came to him, uninvited. Daniel told himself he was projecting, that he was tired, that long shifts did strange things to perception. Still, he pulled the call logs. He didn't search by street name at first. That felt too obvious. Instead, he filtered by date. Late December, year after year. He found the same kinds of notes repeating in different handwriting across different administrations. Resident reports lost time, clock malfunction, dizziness, disorientation, always resolved the same way, no issue found. He circled Alder Street with his pen. Then he noticed something else. The times were rarely exact. 9:16, 9:18, sometimes just written as around 9, but never earlier, never later, always bracketing the same minute. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He tried to remember the last time he'd checked his watch on a call and felt uneasy by what he saw. He couldn't. The next day, he talked to people, casually, carefully, not as an officer running an investigation, as someone asking questions that could pass for conversation. A woman on Alder told him she always felt like Christmas Eve went faster on that street. A man joked that his watch had stopped working twice over the years, always around the same time, always there. Someone else said they avoided walking that block at night, but couldn't explain why. No one used the same words. The shape of the stories was identical. That bothered him more than any single detail. Daniel started keeping a separate notebook, not official, not documented, just times, addresses, notes in the margins. He didn't tell anyone at the station. He didn't tell his sons. He didn't tell himself what he was really doing. One night, while reviewing older records, he found something that made his hands stop moving. A supplemental report, filed decades earlier, different officer, different handwriting, same street. The report was brief, almost dismissive, but attached to it was something unusual. A hand-drawn map, crude, uneven, marked with a symbol near the center of Alder Street. The same shape. Daniel stared at it for a long time. The note beneath it was short, area marked for containment, not access. Daniel closed the folder slowly. It wasn't fear he felt. It was recognition. Whatever Alder Street was dealing with hadn't started with the old man, and it wasn't waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to be managed. And somehow, without realizing it, Daniel had stepped into the pattern. Daniel stopped trusting clocks. Not consciously. It happened slowly. He noticed it first at home. Standing in the kitchen, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, he glanced at the microwave out of habit. 9:17. He frowned and checked his phone. 9:19. 2 minutes apart. No reason, no explanation. He reset the microwave and didn't think about it again, until it happened a second time, then a third. Always after midnight, always when his thoughts drifted back to Alder Street. Daniel began to notice how often time became the center of unrelated conversations. A neighbor joked that Christmas disappeared this year. A cashier mentioned how fast the night went. A man at the gas station complained he'd been late without knowing why. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. He listened. At the station, he pulled a box from storage, archived files no one touched anymore, paper reports, yellowed forms, old handwriting. He flipped through them methodically, 1 year at a time. The language changed across decades. The shape didn't. People described the same sensation in different ways, like waking up mid-thought, like stepping out of a room and forgetting why you entered it, like missing something important but never knowing what it was, and always tucked into the margins or footnotes. Occurred near Christmas, occurred on Alder Street. Daniel marked the pages with sticky tabs until the edges of the files bloomed with color. One night, long after his shift ended, he returned to Alder Street, alone. Not to investigate, to observe. The street was quiet, decorations still up, some flickering slightly in the cold. Snow pressed flat against the curb. No movement, no sound. Daniel stood near the center of the block and closed his eyes. Nothing happened. Still, he felt it. The faint pressure, the sense of standing somewhere that remembered being disturbed. He knelt and brushed snow aside with his glove. The pavement beneath was worn unevenly, a pattern almost visible if you knew how to look. Daniel straightened quickly, pulse sharp. He hadn't imagined it. Back at the station, he spread the hand-drawn map across his desk, compared it to modern layouts, street expansions, resurfacing. The symbol aligned. Not perfectly. Close enough. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't ritualistic. It was functional. Daniel wrote one word at the top of the page. Containment. The realization settled heavily. The house wasn't the source. The old man wasn't the cause. The kids weren't triggers. They were variables. What mattered was the location and the time. Daniel checked his watch again. 9:17. It wasn't running. He hadn't noticed when it stopped. He restarted it with steady hands and sat back, staring at the second hand as it resumed its motion. Something had happened on Alder Street before he arrived. Something he'd missed by minutes. And now, whether he wanted it or not, he was close enough to feel its edges.
Daniel didn't plan to make the call that night. He told himself he just wanted to close a loose end, a courtesy, something small enough to justify to himself without giving shape to the unease that had been following him since Christmas Eve. The station was nearly empty. One light buzzed faintly above the desk as he flipped through the report from Alder Street again. Trespassing, minors released to guardians, no further action. His pen hovered over the page. There was one name he hadn't contacted, Lila Harper's mother. Daniel stared at the phone for a long moment before dialing. It rang twice. "Hello?" A woman answered. "Mrs. Harper, this is Officer Miller. I just wanted to follow up about the incident on Alder Street." There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion, recognition. "Yes," she said carefully. "Is everything all right?" Daniel glanced down at the map on his desk, the symbol, the timing notes, the margins filled with questions. "Your daughter," he said, choosing his words. "She didn't seem shaken, but she noticed things the others didn't." Another pause. "She's observant, always has been." Daniel leaned back slightly. Did she say anything to you after that night? No, Eleanor said, too quickly. Why? Daniel hesitated. Sometimes kids mention details later, things that feel small at first. Silence stretched between them. Then Eleanor spoke again. Officer, has something happened since? Daniel considered telling her everything, the records, the timing, the word containment written in his own handwriting. Instead, he said, no, nothing official. That wasn't a lie. I just wanted to check in, make sure she's doing all right. She is, but I'd appreciate it if you let me know if you find anything else. Her tone shifted slightly at the end. Not fear, concern sharpened by memory. Daniel noticed it immediately. Have you lived in Riverton long? He asked. There it was, another pause, longer this time. I grew up there. Why? Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. Do you remember Alder Street? The line went quiet, for just a second too long. Yes, Eleanor said finally. I do. Daniel thanked her and ended the call. He sat there for a long time afterward, listening to the low hum of the station, a sound that now reminded him uncomfortably of something else. Eleanor Harper knew more than she was saying, not because she was hiding something, because she recognized it. Daniel gathered his notes and slid them into a folder he didn't label. As he turned off the light and checked his watch one last time, a thought settled into place with unwelcome clarity. Whatever Alder Street was holding back, it wasn't just reacting to the present, it was remembering the past, and someone else had been close to it before.
The night that remembered.
Eleanor Harper hadn't planned on staying awake. Christmas Eve had settled into Riverton the way it always did, quietly, without ceremony. The television murmured in the background, some holiday movie she wasn't really watching, its light flickering across the walls of the living room. She sat on the couch with a blanket folded over her legs, a mug cooling in her hands. Outside, the street was calm. Too calm. Eleanor had lived in other places since leaving Riverton, bigger cities, louder streets, places where Christmas felt crowded and noisy and impossible to escape. Here, it was different. Here, the night felt contained. She checked the clock on the wall. 9:12. She frowned, not because of the time itself, but because a familiar tension had begun to gather behind her ribs, the kind that didn't come with a thought, the kind that arrived first, explanation second. The lights on the Christmas tree flickered once. Just once. Eleanor sat up straighter. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was recognition without context, like hearing a song you haven't heard in decades and feeling something twist before you remember why. She muted the TV. The house felt hollow without sound. She stood and walked toward the window, careful not to rush, as if moving too quickly might confirm something she wasn't ready to name. Across the street, every house was lit. Decorations glowed softly, wreaths, strings of lights, inflatable figures frozen mid-cheer. Everything looked normal. And yet, Eleanor felt the same pressure she had felt years ago, the same sensation she hadn't been able to describe back then, when she was younger, when she didn't yet know how carefully a town could learn to forget. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound made her flinch. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Mrs. Harper?" a man asked. His voice was steady, professional. "This is Officer Miller. I'm calling about your daughter." Eleanor's grip tightened around the phone. "What happened?" she asked, already standing again. "She's all right," the officer said quickly. "There's been a situation on Alder Street. I just need you to come pick her up." Alder Street. The word hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "Mrs. Harper?" the officer prompted. Her hand slipped. The phone fell to the floor with a sharp crack, the screen lighting up as it landed face up. Eleanor stared down at it, her heart pounding now, fast and undeniable. Alder Street. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. She bent slowly, picked the phone back up. "I'm coming," she said, her voice lower than before. She didn't ask what had happened. She already knew something had. Eleanor paused in the doorway, her breath caught somewhere between in and out. The feeling surged again, stronger now, unmistakable. Whatever she had left behind in Riverton hadn't disappeared. It had waited. And now, her daughter was standing in the same place she once had. Alder Street looked exactly the way Eleanor remembered it. That was the first thing that unsettled her. The houses were lit for Christmas, warm strings of lights outlining roofs, wreaths hanging on doors, inflatable figures frozen mid-smile on snow-dusted lawns. From a distance it looked almost peaceful, too careful, too preserved. She parked a little farther down the block than she needed to and walked the rest of the way, her boots crunching softly against the thin layer of ice on the pavement. She could already see them. The police car sat near the curb, engine idling. Red and blue lights were off, but the vehicle's presence changed the street, made it feel observed, restrained. Her daughter stood nearby. Lila was wrapped in her coat, shoulders tense, her posture alert in a way Eleanor recognized immediately. Not fear, awareness. The boys were with her, their faces pale, their movements restless, teenagers trying to appear unaffected and failing badly. Eleanor slowed her steps. She had the strange sense that if she moved too quickly, she might arrive before something finished settling. "Mom?" Lila's voice cut through the night the moment she spotted her. Eleanor crossed the remaining distance and pulled her into a tight hug, holding her a second longer than usual. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Lila nodded, but didn't pull away right away. It was weird, but it stopped. Those words sent a cold thread down Eleanor's spine. It stopped. Not nothing happened, not it was nothing. Stopped implied continuation. The officer, Miller, approached, calm, professional. He explained the situation the same way he had to the other parents who were beginning to arrive. Trespassing, curiosity, old man upset but unharmed. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her attention drifting instead to the house behind them. The windows were dark now. That hadn't always been the case. She remembered light there, not bright, muted, uneven, the kind of glow that felt borrowed. "Mrs. Harper?" Miller said, finishing his explanation. "I don't see any reason to take this further." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you for calling." He hesitated for half a beat longer than necessary, then stepped back. As the group began to disperse, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. "Let's go," she said. They started down the street together. Eleanor felt it then. The pressure. It came not from the houses, not from the trees, but from beneath her feet. She slowed unconsciously. Lila stopped too. "What?" Eleanor asked. Lila didn't answer right away. She was staring at the ground. The pavement looked ordinary at first glance, dark, wet from melted snow, scarred with years of wear. But Eleanor followed her daughter's gaze and felt her breath catch. There, a shape. Not clear,
not complete, lines worn thin by time, partially erased by resurfacing, by weather, by neglect, but unmistakable to someone who had seen it before. Eleanor's heart began to pound. "No," she whispered, barely audible. Lila shifted her weight. "Mom?" she asked. Eleanor opened her mouth to stop her. She didn't. Lila took one step forward, her boot pressed down directly over the faint carving. For a moment, Eleanor felt the street tighten like a held breath. Then it released. Nothing visible changed. No lights flickered. No sound rose from the ground. No one else reacted. Lila looked back at her mother, confused. "What?" she asked. Eleanor forced herself to move, to take Lila's arm and guide her forward. "Nothing," she said, too quickly. "Let's just go home." As they walked away, Eleanor didn't look back. She didn't need to. She already knew. The seal hadn't broken, but it had shifted. And whatever had been waiting under Alder Street had felt it too.
The house was dark when they came in. Eleanor flipped the switch by the door, and the living room filled with a soft yellow light that felt almost too gentle for what lingered between them. The Christmas decorations were still there, the small tree in the corner, the lights along the window, but they felt like props left behind after something important had already happened. Lila closed the door quietly behind them. Neither of them spoke at first. Eleanor moved through the familiar motions, hanging her coat, setting her keys down, checking the clock on the wall without meaning to. 9:26. She looked away quickly. "Go get some water," Eleanor said, her voice firmer than she felt. "You must be cold." Lila didn't move. "Mom," she said instead. Eleanor stopped. "Yes? Why did you freeze back there?" Eleanor turned slowly. "I didn't." "You did," Lila said, not accusing, certain. "When I stepped on the street." Eleanor crossed the room and sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. "You were tired. All of you were. Being scared makes things feel bigger than they are." Lila shook her head. "This didn't feel big. It felt specific." That word landed harder than Eleanor expected. Specific. Lila walked closer, lowering her voice, as if the walls might be listening. The lights didn't flicker everywhere, only there. The air felt different only there, and when it stopped all at once. Eleanor closed her eyes. She had told herself for years that memory sharpened fear, that going back made things feel heavier than they were. But listening to her daughter speak, she realized something worse. Lila wasn't remembering, she was observing. "Some places hold on to things," Eleanor said carefully. "That doesn't mean they're dangerous." "Then why didn't you want me to stand there?" Lila asked. Eleanor opened her eyes. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked toward the hallway, stopping in front of a narrow closet she rarely opened. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. "That street," Eleanor said quietly, "wasn't always quiet." Lila's breath caught. "You've been there before." Eleanor nodded once. "When I was your age." She opened the closet and pulled out a small cardboard box, worn at the edges. She carried it to the table and set it down gently, as if whatever was inside could still be disturbed. Inside were old notebooks, loose pages, pencil sketches. Eleanor spread them out. Lila leaned in immediately. The drawings were rough, uncertain, lines drawn and redrawn,
shapes adjusted again and again, variations of the same symbol. Lila pointed. "That's it." Eleanor swallowed. "We didn't know what it was," she said. "We thought it was just something someone made up, a way to feel in control." "Did it work?" Lila asked. "For a while," Eleanor said. Lila traced one of the drawings with her finger. "This one's broken," she said. Eleanor's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "The lines don't connect here," Lila said. "It's like it's incomplete." Eleanor stared at the page. She saw it now, too. Not broken, worn. Time hadn't erased it. Time had weakened it. Eleanor felt the truth settle in her chest, slow and undeniable. "We didn't stop it," she whispered. "We only held it." Lila looked up at her. "Is that what I stepped on?" Eleanor nodded. Outside, a faint gust of wind rattled the window. The Christmas lights flickered once, then steadied. Eleanor closed the box. "We don't talk about this to anyone," she said instinctively. Lila didn't argue. She only said, "Then we need to understand it." Eleanor met her daughter's eyes and realized with a sudden clarity that resisting her now would only repeat the same mistake the town had made before. Somewhere nearby, a phone would ring. But not yet.
They didn't turn on more lights. Eleanor kept the living room dim, as if brightness might scatter the fragile shape of what they were building together. The notebooks stayed open on the table, pages weighted down with old photographs and folded notes. Lila moved between them, connecting things without forcing them. "This one," she said, pointing to a page. "You said it was drawn the same year the street was repaved." Eleanor nodded. "The town resurfaced alder after a bad winter, cracks everywhere." "And the symbol was still there after?" Lila asked. "For a while," Eleanor said. "Then it faded." Lila traced a finger over the paper. "Not faded," she corrected. "Covered." Eleanor felt a chill. They spread a crude street map across the table. Eleanor marked where the house stood, where the center of the block curved slightly inward, where the street dipped just enough for rainwater to gather. "That's where I stepped, right here," Lila said. Eleanor stared at the spot. "That's the center," she whispered. "It always was." They worked in silence for several minutes. Dates, times, Christmas Eve, Christmas morning, always the same window. Between the night of the 24th and the early hours of the 25th. "When people are distracted," Lila said slowly, "when everyone's thinking about something else. When the town is remembering," Eleanor added. The words felt heavy as soon as she said them. Lila looked up. "Remembering what?" Eleanor hesitated, then answered honestly. "Nothing specific, just being together, being vulnerable, repeating the same rituals year after year." Lila's stomach tightened. "No," she said, "like keeping something weak." They compared sketches. Older ones were sharper, more precise. Newer ones were incomplete, uneven. Time hadn't erased the symbol, people had. "Mom," Lila said quietly, "when I stepped on it, it didn't feel like I broke anything." Eleanor looked at her. "It felt like I finished something," Lila continued. Eleanor felt her breath catch. She stood abruptly and crossed to the hallway, opening the closet again. She pulled out another notebook, thinner, older. Inside was a single sentence written in pencil, shaky and rushed.
It only holds if no one touches it. Eleanor sank back into her chair. "That's it," she whispered. Lila leaned forward. "What?" "The seal," Eleanor said. "It wasn't meant to be ignored. It was meant to be maintained." A sound cut through the room. The telephone. Its sharp ring shattered the quiet, making both of them flinch. Eleanor stared at it for a moment too long before lifting the receiver. "Harper residence?" she said. "Mrs. Harper, this is Officer Miller. I wanted to follow up." Eleanor closed her eyes. The conversation unfolded the same way it had before. He asked about Lila. She said she was fine. He mentioned noticing patterns. She chose her words carefully. "You said your daughter noticed something," he said again. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Did she tell you what?" Eleanor looked at Lila. Lila shook her head slightly. "No," Eleanor said, "not yet." A pause. "I grew up here," Eleanor added before she could stop herself. "I know," the officer said quietly. Something in his tone made her grip tighten around the receiver. "When I arrived on Alder Street, it felt like I was late." Eleanor swallowed. "You weren't. You were right on time." Another pause. "I don't think whatever's happening there is finished," the officer said. Eleanor looked at the table, the notes, the sketches, the broken lines. "Neither do I," she replied. They ended the call without promises, without explanations. Eleanor hung up the phone slowly and stood very still. Lila watched her. "That sentence," Eleanor said softly, "the one about not touching it." She turned back to the table, her mind racing now. "It wasn't a warning, it was a mistake." Lila's eyes widened. They told themselves not to interfere, not to look, not to question, and over time, the symbol wore down, Lila finished. Eleanor nodded. "And tonight," she whispered, "you stepped exactly where no one had in years." Lila felt a chill run through her. "So what happens now?" Eleanor looked toward the window, toward the quiet street, toward the place where the town thought the problem had been solved. "We fix it," Eleanor said. She didn't add the rest, that this kind of fixing never lasted forever.
They waited until the street was empty again. Christmas morning came quietly to Riverton. No sirens, no lights, no explanations waiting at the doorstep. The town woke the way it always did, unaware of what had almost happened while everyone slept. Eleanor and Lila stood at the edge of Alder Street, bundled against the cold, breath visible in the pale light of dawn. The decorations were still lit, stubbornly cheerful against the gray sky. Nothing about the street looked dangerous. That was the problem. Eleanor knelt first. She brushed away the thin layer of frost and grit from the asphalt with her gloved hand, exposing the faint lines beneath. The symbol was barely visible now, worn thin, incomplete, like a memory no one had cared to revisit. "This is where it started," Eleanor said softly. "And where it weakened," Lila replied. They worked carefully, not hurried, not afraid. Using chalk, pencil, and memory, they followed the old sketches. Eleanor corrected lines where time had blurred them. Lila adjusted angles instinctively, pausing whenever something felt wrong. "No," Lila said at one point. "That line doesn't close yet." Eleanor trusted her. When the shape finally came together, it didn't glow, it didn't hum, it didn't respond. It simply settled. The pressure Eleanor had carried in her chest since the night before eased. The air felt lighter. The street felt quiet in a way it hadn't. Not restrained, not held back. Resting. Lila stepped back and looked at their work. "Is that it?" she asked. Eleanor studied the symbol one last time. "Yes," she said, "for now." They erased the chalk carefully.
left no sign of what had been restored. By the time the first neighbors began to stir, Alder Street looked exactly the way it always had. Normal. At home, Eleanor poured coffee while Lila sat at the table, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "It's over," Lila said, more statement than question. Eleanor nodded. "It won't bother anyone again." Lila smiled faintly, relief softening her features. Outside, a light snow began to fall, settling over the street like a blanket, covering everything. Eleanor watched it for a long moment before turning away, because she knew something Lila didn't. The symbol had been repaired, but it hadn't been strengthened, and time in Riverton always returned to the same places.